Thank you very much. So welcome, everyone, to what I think is a very interesting, relevant, and timely discussion about inclusion, about social cohesion, about diversity in the Arab world. I am quite interested in this session for a couple of reasons. I'm a journalist by training, and I run a news service called IRIN News that reports about humanitarian crises in the region and more broadly around the world. And so we're often coming across these questions of social cohesion, of marginalization, of inclusion, and the consequences that that can have in very real terms. So this is a subject that for us is quite fascinating. And then on top of that, I myself am Egyptian, Canadian, and I think the questions of third culture children, as we're called, often lead to questions of identity that can remain unresolved for decades. And so again, my connection to the Arab world and how that fits within the broader landscape is quite interesting for me. So the purpose of today's session is really to carve out some space in what is a very busy WEF agenda to really think deeply about some of these questions that touch all of us in different ways and that are kind of more deeply rooted questions of values, of identity, a little harder to put your finger exactly on it. And we've brought together quite an interesting range of people that come at this from very different perspectives, a historian, an architect, a businesswoman, and a diplomat who can try to dissect this issue. And we'll quite quickly also turn to you and hopefully get your perspectives and your inputs as well. So without further ado, I'd like to start with Professor Eugene Rogan, who teaches and studies modern Middle Eastern history at Oxford University, where he is the director of the Middle East Center. And his book, The Arabs, which I'm sure many of you will be very aware of, is a monumental piece of work. I think it's one of the fattest books in my bookshelf. And looks, it needs to be that fat to cover centuries of Middle Eastern history. And so he's a real authority on these topics and is full of kind of stories about the making of the Arab world. So I wanted to start from that historical perspective. Dr. Eugene, you've studied the Arab world for years. What does it mean to be Arab in your view? What stories have shaped the term Arabness? And more collectively, I suppose, our knowledge about ourselves? And you know, what from the region's past has helped define its identity today in your view?
I'm always self-conscious as an American who teaches at a British university to tell Arabs what they are. But it's been very striking to me how often journalists, in talking to me about the book, begin with the question, well, exactly who are the Arabs?
Well, sometimes we need to be told who we are. We need help thinking it through.
You know, my job has always been to try and take Arab sources and then to distill from them what the meaning of Arab history and Arab identity has meant to different Arabs. And the challenge that I faced in trying to write a book about Arab history was to write a book that Westerners would want to read from beginning to end. And I think stories play a really important role in that, because people connect to people's stories in a very direct way. And it allows you to write a history of people rather than of abstract concepts. And it even allows you to balance men and women in the story, because if you want to write a truly balanced history of a society, then the stories that women tell is of equal value to the stories that men tell in getting to grips with the historical experience and what society has been through. But I think if, to answer your question, you wanted to take from the stories of Arab peoples, how they come to grips with their identity, then it really is a kaleidoscope as one moves from Morocco across North Africa, through the Middle East, and to the Gulf, of so many different cultures and experiences, historical, and that identifies the Arabs not just as one people, but as very diverse people. And I think it's that diversity that you really get to celebrate through the storytelling approach.
Ambassador Amre Moussa, I'd like to turn to you next. You will all know very well who Ambassador Moussa is. He was Egypt's Minister of Foreign Affairs before becoming Secretary General of the Arab League. He then went on to chair the 50-member committee that was charged with amending Egypt's constitution at a very polarizing time, and a time of revolution and upheaval in the country. Ambassador, if we draw from Dr. Eugene's description of a kaleidoscope, and we saw in the title of today's session the word fiction, which was in part a reference to having some writers among us, but also, I think, a provocative question around whether the idea of an Arab world is a fiction. And you have, of course, been in public life for decades in the Arab world and have led societies both at a national and at a regional level in trying to move forward. How do you see this question of diversity versus belonging? Is the Arab world too diverse to have a true identity from your perspective?
Well, thank you very much for your very rich introduction. The issue of today is very intriguing. When you talk about the Arab world from history to fiction. So the title is very provocative, and perhaps it borders on being insulting. The Arab world of today is very diverse, yes. Diversity is one of the basic elements of the Arab world. In the Arab world, there are Arabs, the majority, but there are Kurds, there are Amazigh of North Africa, and the Maghreb Arab region. But still, the Arab world is very much alive, away from being a fiction. Otherwise, as we see, why Mr. Trump, the President of the United States, makes the Arab world his first visit abroad. He is not coming here to enjoy a fiction, but to make deals. And the Arab side is also eager to make deals, something that, talking with each other, with America in particular, the superpower, with their interests, and the superpower talking with us about our interests and how to move to the future in a positive way that would take into consideration a common stand towards the new Middle East, or the future Middle East. The Arab world is the majority component of the Middle East. Yes, there is Iran, of course, there is Turkey, and there is Israel, but the Arab world is the power to reckon with if we are talking about a stable future. So back to this notion of fiction. Yes, I understand what is behind that the Arab world is going through a very difficult period. You don't know who is talking on behalf of the Arab world and what is the stand of the Arab world. But I want to tell you that the Arab world is going today through a major operation of change. The Arab world of tomorrow will not be the Arab world of yesterday. And tomorrow means hope, means vision, and means determination. This issue of determination will have to be taken seriously. If we, as you know, we have 65% to 70% of the population of the Arab world below the age of 40. Young people, full of hope, but full of determination that they will not accept to be humiliated or the Arab world to be taken lightly. So my intervention centers on this word, fiction, that we as Arab citizens cannot accept this kind of expression. The Arab world is part of the active movement towards a better future, towards a different future. The Arab world has been taken seriously when it comes to oil production and gas production. It is taken seriously. When we talk about a different Arab world, after the revolutions, after the movements, the intifadas, the protests of 2011, I invite you all to take the Arab world seriously, and that the notion of end of history, that is, we have arrived at a point, and that is it. History has no end. This is a station where we recognize, we Arabs recognize that we are at a very weak turn of history. But this is just a station. All of us in such a society would say that, okay, the powers of today are not necessarily the same powers of 20 years from now. The superpower could be several superpowers. The Middle East could be, and the Arab world could be the hub of a very powerful, energetic societies prevailing and trying to move on and be part of the serious, progressive world of tomorrow.
If I can just push back on you, Ambassador, a little bit, because while I very much love to hear this optimism, I think many in the world will look at what's happening in the Middle East today and see destruction and division. And while, yes, this is perhaps a weak point in history, in fact, it doesn't look like we're heading in a positive direction. And so how do you, I'm trying to reconcile what you've just said with what we're all seeing in the news day to day in terms of where the region is headed.
Well, I'll tell you that the term change is vital for this debate and for any consideration of the situation in the Middle East and in the Arab world. That change. Call it the events of 2011 could be called the revolutions, could be called intifadas, could be called as you like. But it was a sign of that desire and the determination to change the Arab world and to move on. What is happening today is the result of negligence and bad management by us, by all the Arab world, the Arab regimes, but at the same time, with a lot of negative intervention by powerful powers, in particular the Western powers. So that is what brought the Middle East to this point. We see what happened to the Palestinians because of the bad management of this question, and what happened to the Iraqis, what happened in Syria, and so on. So it is a combination of our mistakes and the mistakes committed by the West.
So we'll come back to some of these questions, I think, and Ambassador has helpfully already taken us from the historical perspective that Dr. Eugene brings to the present-day life and now into the future. And so I'll turn to Sheikh Bodour al-Qasimi, to the Ambassador's right. Yes, from your perspective to his right. Sheikh Bodour is excuse me, the chairperson of the Sharjah Investment and Development Authority, but more relevant to this conversation, she's also the founder of Kalimat Foundation for Children's Empowerment, which is a non-profit that fights for the right of every child to have access to books. She's very involved in this space. She's also the director of Knowledge Without Borders, which seeks new approaches to education. She's on the UAE board on books for young people. She's on the board of the UAE section of books for young people, which has launched a fund to support literacy for children in crisis. And it's this particular aspect that I'd like to ask you about, Sheikh Bodour, because one of the biggest challenges that our region faces today is that so many children are out of school as a result of conflicts. And that's not only in Syria, but also in Yemen, in Iraq, and beyond. And the reason I describe this as the future is because our societies will be very much shaped by this next generation of children who, if they are not being educated and having access to this literacy, can, of course, negatively affect where they end up. And so how do you see the role of literacy, of storytelling, of access to education in creating social cohesion in the future in the Arab world?
Thank you, Heba, and I just want to thank everyone for making it here this morning. I know it was an early start, so I appreciate that, and it's so nice to see the full room as well. To be honest, I was really intrigued by the title of this panel discussion, and I was really excited to be part of this. As you said in your introduction, I'm the chair of the Investment and Development Authority, and in that capacity, I'm here in WEF. But I also wear another hat, which is Kalimat Publishing. And I set up my publishing company 10 years ago because of the request, at the request of my young daughter at the time. And I'll just share that story with you if you don't mind. So 10 years ago, my little daughter was 3 years old, and I used to read to her daily, you know, as a first child and a very caring mom. And I wanted the best for her future. And I would read to her Arabic books, and I would read to her English books, because I wanted her to have the best of both worlds. And one day she came to me and she said to me, "Mom, I hate Arabic books." And I just thought, oh my goodness, what have I done here? And I wanted her to be proud of her culture, to be proud of her language, to be proud of her identity, and to know where she comes from. And this really puzzled me for a very long time. And I looked around and she was right. There was not enough available material that would intrigue their imagination at that age. And so I set up my own company, which is Kalimat Publishing, 10 years ago. And now we have over 200 titles. We don't only publish for children, we also publish adult fiction, we publish comics, we publish educational material. So we've expanded into that field. And I'm very passionate about that. And I believe in the power of stories and the power of books to transform lives. And that's what has led me to work in the sphere in providing books, especially for libraries in refugee camps. And when we think about what's happening currently in Syria and in other places in conflict, a lot of children are out of school and out of the education system, and they don't have that access to education. But more importantly, they are living in very dire conditions that inhibit their ability to dream and to imagine a better future. And I believe stories give them the tools to do that, and they provide them with wings that allow them to travel and to dream of a better future, and it gives them hope. And I think that's the importance here of creating all of these libraries for children in these spaces. I'm also very intrigued by what Eugene has said about the importance of having Arabs talk about their own stories. And I grew up reading about a lot of Western writers writing about Arabs. And I thought that's very important for us to provide a platform for our own authors to be the voice of the region. So I'm very interested in women's voices, women coming out of the region, talking about what their issues are. And I think books can be windows into other societies, but more importantly, they can be mirrors, and you can see what's happening in your own society through books and through literature.
Fascinating. Again, a number of points I'd like to pick up on. I'm going to turn to Dr. Marwa and then come back to Eugene to touch on some of what you've just said, Sheikh Bodour. But first, Dr. Marwa Al-Sabouni has actually come from Homs to be here today. And she has lived in Homs from the beginning of the war and has not left throughout, which often raises many eyebrows. And I think when you ask her, she'll say, well, why would I leave? She's a fascinating woman, and I encourage you guys to speak to her afterwards. But she's also an architect who recently authored a book called The Battle for Home, which describes how architecture will play a role in the future of Syria and how it shapes social cohesion in ways that we may not even realize. She knows, obviously, this firsthand from having lived in one of the most targeted cities in the Syrian conflict and literally having bombs dropping around her as she was writing this book. And so I will turn to you, Marwa, now, and she, by the way, also has a PhD in Islamic architecture, if you needed any more introduction. So, Dr. Marwa, if you could just walk us through how you see architecture and design as influencing the social spaces in which we reside, and in both in Syria's past and in its future, how these physical spaces can either contribute to or detract from social cohesion.
First, thank you for your kind words and kind introduction. I think architecture could, continuing to other panelists, Ambassador Moussa and Sheikh Bodour, the architecture, in my view, the most important thing that could accomplish is identity, because identity would be manifested first and foremost in our surroundings. And when we look around us in our built environment in the Arab world or the Middle East, as we have to face that we are in a phase of contradiction, and we have to accept that we are in a phase of collapse, as I see it. It's not a. I have to disagree with Ambassador Moussa that we are in a decline, not in a change. And that has been manifested for me as an architect. I could see it in the shape of our built environment, which put our old history adjacent to the new phase that has no shape and has no values, that could perpetuate the conflict that we had among us as groups. I think we haven't. Identity, for me, is related to accomplishment. And when a person accomplishes something, he or she would like to belong to this accomplishment. So it's like cheering for the winning team. And since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you could correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't accomplished anything. And this is manifested in our architecture and in our surroundings. So I think the way that we build could be a good place for us to change and for us to start a new phase. Linking this to the conflict in Syria and my country, I've noticed that the way that people are grouped or ghettoized in urban slums that have been shaping our cities for the last decades was a place where tension grew and was a place of alienation that cut the ties between people and their cities. And here's the important thing, that when you speak about the future, we are on a verge of a turning point, which is the reconstruction, when all the eyes of the world are on our destroyed cities and our destroyed towns. When reconstruction can be either a healing tool, or can be a part of the cycle where you can build new buildings that doesn't belong to people and doesn't promote any social cohesion, where people used to meet and work together, where they had expressed themselves, whether in the souk, in the productive places, whether in the spiritual places they had, the housing that used to bring them together, the nature that grew in their cities, or the promised alternative, which is mega projects and towers where people will be more and more alienated from each other and from their city and find no reference point, which is basically the core idea of identity.
I'm conscious of time, and I'd like to get your input as well. But I'd first just like to come full circle back to you, Dr. Eugene, because Sheikh Bodour mentioned, the importance of Arabs telling their own stories, and in fact, in your book, you often refer to, or in fact, primarily to Arab scholars and sources, and I think prioritize really having those voices as part of your research, but also to what Marwa has just said, that we haven't accomplished anything in the Arab world since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Are there stories that you look back on in our history that might surprise us even as Arabs and help us think differently about our identity today?
I don't know that stories can work in the way of representing something bigger than the individual's experience. I think that there are individuals who stand out in history, the political leaders, the Gamal Abdel Nasser's or the Fawzi al-Kawukchi's, people who seem to play big roles in historical moments, and their stories are, of course, important because they were prominent. But I'm a little humbled listening to Marwa talk about what great people in power have done to the cities in which people like you and I live, how this affects the way we identify with our society, with our community. And in the case of the destroyed cities of the region, what hopes we might place in the future are very closely tied to the way in which we go about rebuilding. And I'm ducking your question a bit.
Because there are no positive stories?
Well, no, but I mean, it comes back to me saying I hesitate as the foreigner to tell the Arabs about their identity. And while I would like to take away from my exchanges with people in the Arab world a better sense of where they have come from and where they are going, you know, as I said, I have nothing to tell Marwa about whether the Arabs have accomplished something or not since the fall of the... I mean, I believe they have. But, well, I mean, you can take it to a level of abstraction and say people's life expectancy is much longer, their standard of education is much higher, their hygiene is much improved. They live in a much more integrated society with the global community. They're contributing in the arts and culture in ways that are often overshadowed by the political catastrophes.
But this is the case of all the world. The whole world is... this is nothing that we have accomplished. This is something that we have imported. So it's been in our hands, thrown in our hands, like with the rest of the world, whether it's third world or fourth world or whatever. So we haven't accomplished anything. And we have to remember that the concept of Arabism started with Michel Aflaq, who was French-educated Syrian and one of the founders of the Al-Ba'ath party. So
it could have been with Ibn Khaldun and with the cycle of history.
No, because Arabism is derived from the word Arabic, and the Arabic, or the spoken language, I believe, was a tool within the Islamic world before that. And after the fall of the Islamic world and after the decline they faced, they were stuck with the tool.
All I would say is I believe that what the Arab world has contributed in terms of world culture, it may be something that's going on in other parts of the world too, but it is a unique contribution to that. You are not just importing other people's ideas in the film or the novel or the painting, you are exporting them too. I think in terms of architecture, someone like Zaha Hadid has brought a kind of original creativity to thinking about space that...
No identity at all. And there are so many architects who would not share the positive view that you have of Zaha Hadid, or its
so
product.
Who would share that view?
Yeah, but because I'm sorry, I don't want to take it any further, but because the crisis of identity is not a crisis of the Arab world alone; it's a crisis of the whole world now. Yeah.
Ambassador, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I do agree with what Marwa said about the decline. Yes, indeed, we are going through a very a unique period of our history, marked by decline and chaos. But this should behoove us to change. And this is what I mean by change. Now, there is a determination that this state of affairs should not continue. And it is our responsibility to get out of this. We became aware that not all the advice we get from here or there, east or west, should be accepted at its face value. For example, the way the Middle East was geographically formed at the Sykes-Picot, I don't think it is possible to repeat that. The public opinion, a very strong public opinion in the Arab world, will stand firm against any intervention of that kind. But I don't understand Marwa. She comes from Syria, and what happened to Syria is beyond belief. So it reached her belief in her identity. But she will across that period. The question that what have we done? What has the Arab world done? Oh, a lot of things. The cultural, as you mentioned, Ibn Khaldun and others, etc. But the cultural effect and influence was very strong on the world history. And as I said, this is just a station. Don't lose faith. We are going to move on. But the secret thing is that we have to change.
Okay.
We have to change.
Why?
We committed mistakes, major mistakes to ourselves. We have to change.
Why do we have to
so
change?
believe in change.
Yeah, I believe in change. But
And
I'm saying
be
that we
determined
have
to do better, and that we should not repeat what happened in the past. And I'm not talking about the past, the historical past. No, the past 100 years or 50 years. Mistakes in Syria, in Egypt, in everywhere. So, but hope, vision, and determination, we are going to move on. Don't lose faith.
One last interjection by Sheikh Bodour, and then we'll turn it over to you.
While I'm interested in what Marwa had to say, and I understand her perspective, I think that change is evident and change will come. But I think one of the important aspects of change here is the ability for us to provide that platform for people to make that change. And as I said earlier, that perhaps that platform was limited. And when we talk about Ibn Khaldun and other authors or historians who had made their mark in the Arab world, we don't see that today because of the unavailability of that space. And one of the challenges we face is the censorship or the freedom of expression in the region. We're very limited with what we can say, and there's a big divide between what is said and what can't be said, and a lot of it has to do with self-censorship as well. There are a lot of cultural and religious things that prevent us from really fully expressing perhaps our thoughts and our ideas, and I believe that needs to change, and we need to allow authors the freedom to say what they want to say.
So the panelists have pointed to a few things. If the question is, how do we increase a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, while at the same time as a sense of inclusion and diversity in the Arab world? I think we've pointed to, Dr. Eugene has talked about the cultural and art space and how that's important in creating a sense of culture and identity. Marwa has talked about the importance of the architectural design in the cities in which we live and how that affects how we feel and the spaces we inhabit. Sheikh Bodour has referenced stories as a way of giving hope to people about the future, and also just now recently the concept of freedom of expression and how important that is into shaping a cultural dialogue. And then finally, I think Ambassador Moussa has referenced the role of youth and how that can be moving forward a way to bring us back to a place of a more healthy or compared to healthier points in our history. And so what I would invite from you is, what are some concrete approaches that you would suggest in your experiences as helping to contribute to this sense of identity as we move forward? And I'll start here. Yes, please. There'll be a microphone coming to you. And if you can also just introduce yourself, please. Thank you. Yes, 1 minute would be great.
Yes, I'm Mohammedan Mijin from Iraq. I'm a mechanical engineer by profession, have PhD from University of Birmingham in history, and I'm also studying Najaf in Al-Hawza Al-Almiya. Well, I want أريد أن أبدأ راح أتكلم بالعربي من حيث انتهى السفير موسى.
I'm going to speak in Arabic, and I will start from where Ambassador Moussa ended, and the discussion with Ms. Marwa. Since I'm from Iraq, I have noted several important comments. In 2003, the regime fell, and a new regime was established after 2003 in Iraq. There wasn't a state. We did not have a state. if it existed, then it would have continued, because I believe in the civil state, what we call a civil state or a civil regime. Iraq has 6 countries on its borders: Iran, Turkey, and 4 Arab countries. Iran is a huge empire, and so is Turkey. Turkey is a huge empire. These regional powers, regional countries, have a positive and negative impact on the situation in Iraq, both at the same time. Now, if we add the regional conflict and international conflicts in Iraq, we will find that we don't have a balance of powers. There is a conflict of powers. Oil and gas that exists in Iraq and the countries of the region also has a great impact on the type of conflict raging currently and in the formation of the greater Middle East. Iraq has a lot of diversity: Kurds, Turkmen, Yazidis, and others. This diversity has to be a point of strength, as is the case in the United States, for example. However, in Iraq, it is a weakness, and we need to look at this. We need to study this from a social perspective. In Iraq, we also have other types of diversities. We have Christians, we have Sunnis, Arabs. Christians are in Iraq since hundreds of years. This should also be a strength, not a point of conflict or a source of conflict. I think the mismanagement of these crises, and this is extremely important, not only in Iraq, but also in the rest of the Arab world, this mismanagement is what leads to the current problems. The bad management of the crises of the conflict has led to the existence of ISIS, Daesh, and extremism. I think that religion needs to be a unifying power and not one that separates us. It should unify us. And this is why we have a lot of issues, we have a lot of discussions. Many of the ulama and religious clerics were invited to this conference to talk about this. We need to fill the gaps. We need to contribute as clerics, as ulama, in filling these gaps, bridging these gaps. We need to play a positive, not a negative role. I believe that Iraq is the strategic point of balance in the region within the greater Middle East. If we do not look at Iraq from this perspective, it will be divided the Lebanese way or the Yugoslav way. It will be completely divided, and this is not in the interest of the Arabs, nor in the interest of the region, nor in the interest of the world. Iraq overlooks the Gulf. It's close to Iran. It borders with Iran, and Iran reaches Afghanistan, and Turkey connects us with Europe. We need to look at this carefully when we are thinking of Iraq. I believe that Iraq represents the strategic point of balance in the region. Thank you. We will take 2 more interventions.
Right here in the second row.
Thank you very much. My name is Amre. I'm an economist by profession, and I'm the executive director of the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies in Egypt, it's a think tank. I want to make 4 very specific points and quickly. And I'm disagreeing with Marwa and what she said. I think we're being very unfair to ourselves if we claim that nothing has happened in the Arab world in the Ottoman Empire. And I want to thank Dr. Eugene for mentioning. There is so much to mention. It's not all or zero. We have added, maybe you added less, okay, over time, and it has to do with the international setting. But there is a lot to be said. This is one. 2, I think, from the perspective of architecture, when we look at the modern style and when we look at the towers and we relate this to the loss of identity, I think we're confusing 2 things. An international trend of new architecture with the modern life, okay, and this should not be translated into a loss of identity by the Arabs. It's happening everywhere. It's a new style. If it's a loss of identity, it's for everybody, not just for the for the Arabs. And then my third, I lost it.
It is 8:30 in the morning.
It has to do with the identity. Again, I see the 2011 and what happened from 2011 on is an attempt to regain, as a matter of fact, the identity, the Arab identity, through having the will of the people and seeking freedom, seeking a better life and an improved life. The fourth one, and yes, again, I think the title of the session, I agree with Ambassador Moussa. It's a bit on the offending side. I mean, taking from history to fiction, as if we have disappeared altogether. Thank you. There's one that is lost.
I'll come back to you in just a moment. So just one at the front row here. I have strict instructions to end on time, so I will be disciplined.
Okay, I'm Ahmed. I'm also an engineer by profession. Actually, I actually understand that there is a lot of actually lost hope in the current situation, where people see that we are coming into a decisive point, and we have in the brink of collapse, as everybody sees. But I think if we compare this to the period that ended up the Abbasi actually era, when also we had even a more chaos situation. I think everybody read history better than me. And then we saw also that there came the invasion of the Tatar, and the Mughals actually came to the region, Mughal Tatar. And what happened actually that these people, our culture was so powerful, our identity was so powerful, that these guys carried Islam actually into Asian area. So we are the one who affected them culturally. We changed their culture. The Mughal, they are the guys who are the ones who took Islam and spread Islam in Asia and took it all over to China. Okay? So we have to understand that actually the issue of conflict that's happening, although it is very, what we say, frustrating at this point in time, but I think this is very positive because the amount of change that the Arab world have seen in the last 50 years actually, if we all remember that 50 years ago, 80% or 90% of the population were living in deserts, okay? And we see now that these guys have been well educated. They have been world educated, everybody, all the Arab young people in most of the countries. They have been actually interacting with the world. I understand quite well that the last 70 years actually is a period of conflict, but it's a period of change. And this change have built the fundamentals of our countries. Now what's happening now is that the political system is not able to cater or to cope with the change that happened with the mentality of the young people. And the way they have been ruling these countries are not suitable for the new era. And this is what's happening now. I believe it is a sort of conflict. It might take 10, 15, 20 years. It's very small periods in terms of history, you can tell that. But I believe what's coming out of it is going to be very positive. If we remember what happened in Europe, conflict over more than 300 and 400 years, and this conflict took a long time, and then it came out something very important. وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ لَفَسَدَتْ.
Thank you so much. So I will literally ask each of you in 30 seconds to provide your kind of key takeaway to the audience. We heard about the role of clerics in trying to ease some of the divides. We heard about kind of the revolutions as a sign of or an attempt to regain identity, and to look at change over the long term, and that it takes time to recover from these kinds of massive changes. And I think the other point being around the political governance that might be falling behind rather than the people being the problem. So I think maybe I'll let Marwa, I'll come to you last. So I'll start with the ambassador, if that's okay.
Well, I don't believe that we lost our identity to regain it. But what we should regain is the hope and the full determination to move on. But the identity has nothing to do with this. To be victors or to be defeated, that doesn't mean that if we are defeated, we are not Arabs. If we are victors, we are Arabs. No, we are. This is our identity. And we have to prove that this identity, we carry it, and we not only defend it, but we move with it to the future. This is what I mean by change. Regaining our determination and vision to link up with the world, and with the 21st century in particular.
Eugene?
Well, I think I take away from this that people in the Arab world should celebrate their history. They should celebrate their fiction, actually. There is nothing offensive in the word fiction. Yet I think neither history nor fiction is going to be the best guide to the way the Arab world can resolve its problems and its issues. I think that the Arab world has proved itself to be its own best friend and its own worst enemy.
Sheikh Bodour.
I just want to comment on the political instability, and I think that came out quite a few times in the discussion in the audience. And I want to say that you shouldn't underestimate the power of stories in cross-cultural understanding as well. This is an important aspect. And as Najib Mahfoud said, life without stories will be a catastrophe. So I think the importance of having people tell stories and read about other people's stories does reduce the amount of violence in the region, the political instability, and will hopefully promote peace and prosperity.
And finally, Marwa.
I feel that the discussion turned into identity, from storytelling into identity, which is, for me, a big proof of how we are in a crisis of identity, because we just find ways to talk about it because it is very lost and it's very controversial. Commenting back to the audience notes, that I want to make clear that I'm not saying that change is not. I'm losing hope, or we don't need to change. On the contrary, I feel that we have to confront ourselves and diagnose the problem, right? So we can heal from it. And when we take examples of make examples of people demonstrating or people seeking whatever they are seeking, it's not a sign of positive change. It's a sign of frustration. It's a sign of collapse, because you can see how we can do something with will intention. We can do something that we seek. We are seeking something, but we are, because we are in the phase of decline. We don't have any. We don't have the right tools. We don't have the right tools. We don't have the guidance, and the guidance is the core and essential thing about change. Without guidance, we won't change. We just fall in chaos that we are facing now. So I guess when Mr. Ahmed, you talked about how the Mughal took Islam. They didn't take Arabism. They took a religion. And in every major culture where was in the history, from the pagan history until now, religion was a part of an essential part of identity. But we are in a world now that declined religion as a guiding concept. So I guess this is a starting point to find our guidance. To find our identity.
I think like in much of the world today, it's a lack of leadership in many cases. And like the ambassador said, time for us to take ownership of the future. So thank you very much for coming so early in the morning to have this very deep and thoughtful discussion. And please follow up with the panelists afterwards.